When you look at a newborn baby, they're limitless. You look into the eyes of a newborn baby. Why do we all love them so much? I mean, it's so beautiful, right? You look into their eyes and there is nothing blocking, nothing limiting. They're just full of wonder. And compare that with a moment in the day when you're frustrated or angry or sad, somebody's upset you or something's gone terribly wrong, and your system shuts down. What shuts down? It's your consciousness, because a protective layer comes on board. So it's almost like a lift going up a high-story building instead of having to walk up the stairs. It's such an incredible aid to evolution. Each day you're recalibrating your system. And when you do this day after day after day after day, your system attunes to that and it stays in those states for longer. It stays prayerful longer. It stays meditative longer. It stays pure and simple longer.
Hello, Elizabeth. Thanks for coming here. Thank you for your time. And it's always a joy to be with you.
And you.
Thank you so much. So, we had this amazing session yesterday with all of these great people. And unfortunately, it was a very short session on evolution of consciousness. If you don't mind, I would like to take off from there. We all spoke about, we touched the tip of the iceberg, where we all just spoke about just the evolution of consciousness, what it means to each of us. So, I would just like to start from there and ask you, what do you really mean by evolution of consciousness?
Well, it's a very vast topic and we could become very esoteric, but I think that will be not so exciting. So think about any day in your life, Purnima. And there are times when you might feel happy and joyful, and what happens? You expand outwards into the world, because when you're feeling happy and joyful, you want to connect with other people, and you give of yourself, and there's nothing blocking it. And compare that with a moment in the day when you're frustrated or angry or sad, somebody's upset you or something's gone terribly wrong, and your system shuts down. What shuts down? It's your consciousness, because a protective layer comes on board. So the more we have challenges, difficult emotions that we cannot release from our system. It could be very difficult things like trauma, childhood trauma that sits in the subconscious that affects everything we do. Or it could be something as simple as just a row you had with your husband and you haven't got over it. I mean, you still love him. Everything's going to go on normally, but you're just annoyed, right? So these things create an energy vibration in our system. Where does that sit? It sits in our consciousness. Imagine it as a field. And the yogis had a wonderful way of describing it. They talked about the Chit lake. So Chit is the word for consciousness. A lake of Chit, a lake of consciousness. And it's a very apt image because consciousness is fluid, like water is. It's dynamic. It's always moving. And it can be still and smooth, like an absolutely still pond where you can see right through to the bottom, or it can be turbulent. And we all know that turbulence from when we have rocky emotions. And, and even the physiology of the brain reflects it. So, for example, when you're in a state of stress or anger or anxiety or fear, the part of the brain that becomes active is what's known as the midbrain here. And it does so for our survival, because when those negative things happen, it means that we have to go into active mode. We have to be alert. Our limbs have to be active. So blood moves to our limbs. It doesn't sit nicely in the center of our being. It moves from the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex area, back into the mid and the reptilian brain at the back and into the brainstem. And so a lot of stuff gets stored in parts of the brain that we don't access very easily. We don't access by thinking, because thinking is associated with the chit lake in yoga and the prefrontal cortex in Western science. So it's a defensive or attacking mode of being able to survive. So you think about how this developed in human beings and other animals, other mammals too, over time through evolution. And you realize that this was a mechanism for living in the wild, for survival, including the earliest humans who had to deal with, lions and tigers and bears and woolly mammoths and, all sorts of things, right? Which we don't deal with the same physical predators around, but we have a different type of stress that affects us, or type of survival mechanism in today's world. And unfortunately, this physiology relies on having a blip of stress or a blip of having to fight or defend or run away or whatever, and then long periods of calm where the nervous system can settle down again. In the modern world, especially for people living in cities, that stress is maybe lower level than being chased by a bear, but it's pretty continuous. So our nervous systems don't cope so well. And what happens is, it's not at the nervous system level, it's at the field of consciousness level. We go into a contractive mode when those things happen. Our consciousness shrinks, if you like. Whereas when we're feeling joyful and loving and happy and peaceful, and we're also in a calm situation, there's none of that. The consciousness can start to expand into its natural state. So that's one aspect of evolution, that we go from very narrow, constricted to more expansive, joyful. But then when you look at it from the spiritual perspective, we go much further. So this is just at the very human level. And that's all within a very thin band of what our heart and mind are capable of. Swami Vivekananda, the great Indian saint, sage, I don't know what to call him. He's just one of those beings, right? So he put it very beautifully. He said, there's a thin film of consciousness in between two great oceans, the ocean of the subconscious and the ocean of the superconscious. Now, the subconscious we access through spiritual practice, through meditation, through a process that we have in Heartfulness called cleaning. We're able to remove the layers and layers and layers of accumulated emotional heaviness that sit in our subconscious, the trauma, and not only trauma, the things we become attached to in any way, or that form our habits from childhood. And it can be something as simple as what time you take breakfast because of your culture, or the fact that you have routines and habits like cleaning your teeth in the morning, or, what time you go to bed. All those things sit as subconscious patterns. Because imagine if we had to remember them all and think about them all. Our minds would just not function. Driving a car, we use the subconscious because we've learned how to drive. We don't have to think about turning the ignition on and using the clutch and steering and looking in the rear vision mirror. If we had to think about it all, we wouldn't be able to do anything else. When you see small children riding their bikes, singing, hands off the handlebars, just having fun, chatting as they're going, they're not thinking about how to ride a bike. So many things move into our subconscious. The past, basically. It's our repository of past memories, vibrations, emotions, whatever you like to call it. But what happens with a practice, a meditative practice, you start to clean this out. And you start to take away layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, moving back until eventually, depending on your belief or experience, you can go back through every past life of your existence, back to the beginning of your soul's existence, through the subconscious, back to the source of your being, the source of your soul's existence on one side. So imagine, how vast the subconscious is. And that's part of our evolution of consciousness, to be able to delve into that, purify it, and move back. There's a wonderful thing where Swami Vivekananda, again, he writes about his guru, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and he says he could look at a human being who came in front of him and know all his past lives within 10 minutes. So this is accessible, this field. Remember, we're sitting in this narrow film of consciousness, and then this extends vastly back to the beginning of our existence, our subconscious. Then on the other side, you have what's called the superconscious, which in one sense you can say is the future, although that's, again, you're looking at a time spectrum and consciousness goes beyond that. But here we're looking at being able to access the wisdom, the inspiration, the creativity of the universe through the mind, through consciousness. Not just the mundane existence in the world, but in all the other dimensions we live in. And human beings live in multiple dimensions. We all know this. We dream, right? Is the dream our reality here on this earth? But it's still our reality. And I don't know if you've seen the film Inception, but in Inception there are dreams within dreams within dreams, and the whole thing is convoluted and it's like a dance, right? It's not a linear thing. We all know this. We all know, for example, that, when I'm in Australia, if I think of you and I'm remembering you fondly, it won't surprise me if I get a text from you that day or the next day, or an email, and vice versa. It happens with your kids. It happens with people that you know. It's a wonderful thing. It means that our minds are able to reach out way beyond our physical being. Not just through internet and Zoom and all that sort of thing, but it literally happens, doesn't it, with each other. So think about how our consciousness can expand and contract across dimensions. It's elastic. It's a dynamic field. And our evolution is in starting to explore that field. We can stay very limited. We can say, okay, I believe that there is only what I see in front of me as my existence, and my mind is only what I know of it now. That's one way of living. And there are many people who choose to do that. But for consciousness to evolve, you're expanding and dissolving boundaries all the time. And what creates the boundaries? So these are the things that in all spiritual traditions, and certainly in yoga, which is what I've been doing for the last 35 years, that, we create that through all this past that we accumulate. We keep limiting ourselves. When you look at a newborn baby, they're limitless. You look into the eyes of a newborn baby. Why do we all love them so much? I mean, it's so beautiful, right? You look into their eyes and there is nothing blocking, nothing limiting. They're just full of wonder. Everything is, they just take in like a sponge, because there is nothing limiting their consciousness at that stage. But over time, through education, through our families, through our cultures, we start to create these boundaries. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but for consciousness to evolve, we have to reverse this process and undo some of the limitations we've created that make us, we're not able to realize our potential. So, sorry to go rambling on, but, if you think of evolution of consciousness, you can take it on the purely human level, that I'm going to become a better human being. I'm going to be less concerned with just myself and this narrow limitation, and expand out to think of family, then community, then nation, then globe, then universe. That's one expansion of consciousness. But the other is into multiple dimensions, right back to the source, through these two avenues of subconscious and superconscious.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So as we spoke about this two dimensions, not just two, but as we spoke about the expansion across this super and subconscious range, I also know that you have done a lot of research in the yogic tradition, and there are these subtle bodies, 3 subtle bodies, and I would like to hear how we can map this expansion of subconscious and superconscious into those 3 subtle bodies, and try to find a perception which is,
Right.
unifying both, if that's possible.
It's a great question. So when you look at the yogic tradition, there are 3 bodies. There's the physical body, and we all know it anyway. We all talk about mind, body, spirit, right? Mm-hmm. All traditions talk about this. We all know that there's a physical body, or matter, which is the most outward, it's the most physical, it's the most solid aspect of our being. We also know we have a mental body, a mind, a heart, and that this is the field of consciousness where we think, we dream, we have our inspiration, we create, etc. And let me preface this by saying they're not separate. I'm talking about them as 3 separate things, but they're not in fact separate. There are many, many layers, and there's fluidity between them, but this is just for the sake of understanding. So physical body, mental body, the mind, it's also called the astral body, the subtle body, and it's where all this emotional stuff, all the thoughts, feelings, ideas, imagination, everything sits in this middle body. And then we have the soul, what's known as the causal body. And this is the spiritual life force of our being, you can say. The spark that makes us alive. When new life comes into being, what is it that makes new life? When somebody dies, what is it that leaves? Scientists in the past used to measure bodies before and after death to see if there was any change in weight. And of course there wasn't. So what was it that left? It wasn't something physical, but it made all the difference between being alive and dead. And this life force is what we know of as the soul, or the Atma, or Ru, or, it has different names in different cultures. So these 3 bodies, the physical body, we need to look after. But can it evolve during our lifetime? Not really. In a species, evolution takes time. Sometimes it happens in quantum leaps. But for an individual during their life, my body's not going to evolve. It's going to age, unfortunately. And I'm well aware of that at this age. Things don't function as well. But the more you look after it, and the more you do practices like yoga or qigong or healthy living, etc., you will have it in better condition for longer. But it doesn't really evolve. I can't suddenly have 6 fingers from 5, or 10 ears, or, fins or wings or whatever. The soul does change, but it's immutable. It's immutable, but on the other hand, it can be enhanced also. But it's not something that we can do anything about its evolution. That happens as a result of our living on this earth. So what is it that we're looking at with evolution? It's this middle body, this subtle body of mind and heart. And when I talk about heart, I don't mean the physical heart. I mean the vibrational heart, the energetic heart, the spiritual heart. Because it's the center of our field of energy. Whether you look at it from the Western physiological perspective or the yogic chakras, it's the midpoint in our system. It's the point from which all the blood flows throughout our system. It's the joining point, the midpoint between body and soul. This is where it's all in connection. It's also where we connect with each other on a vibrational level that we're not even conscious of most of the time. Always, and you know this if you enter a room, right? Say you enter a room and people have been arguing. Do you feel it? Yeah. Something in you straight away knows that there's something not right in this room. What happens when you go into a household, somebody's home where there's peace, there's happiness, there's harmony? How do you feel when you go there?
Yeah, we feel that too.
We feel it, right? This ability to perceive at an unconscious level is there in all of us. We say some people are more sensitive than others, but everyone feels it at some level. We may not be aware of it, but we feel it in our whole being. The problem is we think that it's only the mind that matters and what we know. And what we know is just such a small part of who we are. And that's related to this consciousness and super and subconscious as well. That, it's most of what we are, we're not even aware of most of the time. So going back to your question again, that, we have 3 bodies. We actually have multiple layers and then layers and layers around the soul as well. Such fine things, they're not even called bodies, which Babaji, the founder of the Heartfulness movement and Sri Ramchandra mission, etc., he describes so beautifully in his books. He says there are many, many more layers. But to get to those, you've got to start somewhere, and we start from the heavier, the physical. And all these layers of heaviness that build up in that physical then, through all our interactions, through our emotions, through our, the things that affect us and stay with us that we can't let go of. Anger, hurt, sadness, they become weight in our system. And you can even see within the heart the different points where different emotions lodge, where guilt lodges, for example, which is such a heavy point when guilt is there, where greed and jealousy and lust, where worries, where anger, all these points are visible in terms of inner visibility, of seeing them in the system and being able to then work on removing that energy, that heaviness from the system through spiritual practice. So how does it relate to super and subconscious? Most of the samskaras that we hold, these impressions that I spoke about, the past, they sit in our subconscious. Once that's cleared out of the system, then we can start to access the superconscious because we're not weighed down. Another way of looking at it, and this is again something from Babaji's books, is he talks about going from the outside, the periphery of heaviness, of complication, of entropy, if you like, to the center of our being. This science of the center, which is just, for me, makes such perfect sense, because once you become aware of it, and you become aware of it through meditative practices, or I certainly did through heartfulness practices, then you learn how at other times of the day, not only when you're meditating, if you do get disturbed and your consciousness is suddenly contracted because of what's going on, you can stop, you can close your eyes, and or even without closing your eyes, and you can center yourself. You can go in to the center of your being where that stillness is, and you can recalibrate. And then suddenly it's like your consciousness goes, whew. Instead of being tied in a knot, it's released. Within this subtle body that we spoke about, we have this field of consciousness. We have the canvas upon which everything's happening. We also have the senses bringing information in from outside. We have energy flows throughout our system that are going on. And then we have 3 other very, very important functions of the mind that have a lot to do with evolution of consciousness. So first one is what we call manas, or mind. Our thinking, our contemplating, the thoughts that are whizzing through our system. And at a very superficial level, when we're not diving deep, when we're not able to go deep within ourselves, it's generally tied up with thoughts, and often very random, not very useful or very constructive thoughts. In fact, if you look at the science, roughly 50% of the thoughts of many people are negative, and they're just noise. They're not about what they're actually doing in the moment. They can be sitting at work and 47% of their thoughts, or 50-something% of their thoughts, are on other things, just chatter. So it's not a very productive way to be using the mind. The mind is controlling us. They call it monkey mind. The mind is controlling us rather than us being able to use it for purpose in life. And so what happens as a first step when you start to meditate and you start to remove all the impressions that are clogging up and creating heaviness in your system is that there's space. There's not all this chit-chat all the time. Sometimes there is, when things are being removed and there's a lot of activity, but it gets less and less and less and less. So what happens? Suddenly your mind is free to be able to focus on other things other than the chatter. So, when we meditate, what do? We're having a very, very simple and very light suggestion that the source of light in the heart is attracting us from within. We're using the power of thought to take us inwards. And the clearer and the lighter and the simpler your mind is, the easier it is to do that. As well as that, if suddenly we have a problem to solve, there's some difficult thing in the family and there's tension or something, and you need to get in there and do whatever you can to help resolve things. What happens if your mind is so full of tension and anxiety that you get so upset that you can't function? You might be really concerned and want to do a lot, but will you be very functional in helping? Whereas when the mind is clear, you can stop, you can pause, and you can say, okay, what is in the best interests of everybody concerned? How can we solve this problem in a way that is going to help everybody as much as possible? It's like a doctor or a nurse in a hospital. If they get upset every time a patient's ill, they're not going to be very good at helping the patient compared to somebody who is, I wouldn't say detached. I think you become more sensitive, but not entangled in the problem. So, when you look at the mind and how it's refined, manas or thinking, it starts to become clearer, and as a result, and as you go deeper into the heart, instead of just thinking, the feeling level. Like you feel what's needed in the moment, like a mother does with a baby. Does a mother have to think through lots of stuff? No. The mother just feels and responds to the baby, doesn't she? So our manas starts to go into the level of feeling because it's through the heart, not through a process of logic and thinking and rationality. That's there. That stays. We need that too. But the heart drives it. So our evolution from thinking to feeling, and that's experience, right? Then expands to go beyond that, where we start to really want to change ourselves, to refine ourselves, to become something. Not just have experiences in meditation, which are lovely, and we think, oh, great, now I feel things. We want to take that to the next level where we start to become a person who has that mental capacity fully realized in their daily living. Even that's not enough. The mind, manas, keeps going as we go deeper and as we refine to a state of being which is not interested in becoming anymore, because it is. And finally, through spiritual practice, because our focus is on the divine, on the source, we disappear and only that's left. So to a state of non-being. So this evolves, and with it, consciousness can expand, because we're no longer focused on me. We've gone way, way, way beyond that. Me and my thoughts are not in the equation anymore. Of course, we still have thoughts, but they don't matter. Second function of the mind that changes with practice is intellect. Again, very, very important aspect. These are all good things. They're being God-given, they're wonderful, wonderful functions. We just don't know how to use them well. And our practice helps us to learn how to use them well. So intellect, when it's at its sort of base level, lowest level, most external level, is only concerned with knowing, and it's a good function. It helps us learn academically. It helps us to, be smart, etc. But it's very much on the surface again. And unfortunately, it limits us the same way the mind does, because we're stuck in knowing. We think we know. And it's not a very, very healthy way of being, because there's not that innocence of a baby that is willing to discover, willing to learn. And so you might have something really useful to teach me. But if I think I know more than you, I won't be open to it. So I'm not going to get that wonderful benefit of what you have to offer me. But as we go deeper and deeper and deeper, intellect develops into the qualities of intelligence and wisdom and intuition through the heart again. And so we're moving away from me knowing to intelligence and wisdom, which is connected with everything else, which is connected with the source, which is connected with other people. I can pick up, if you have a thought, I can pick up on it through the heart without you having to say a word, when real intelligence and wisdom is there. It's not a mental process anymore. It goes deeper, it's more direct. And then the last one is ego, which everybody thinks is the big bad wolf. But again, it's not. Ahankara or ego is, it's our identity. We wouldn't function without it. We couldn't think, we couldn't eat, we couldn't sleep, we couldn't do anything without the ego, because it's the I that does all that. But again, we attach it to so many things. We could say that you are Indian, I am Australian. It's an identity, right? It has no value other than to have a passport for me to be able to travel here, etc. But if I identify with that, if I identify with being Australian and I think that's good or bad, then I have a problem.
Mm.
Or if I identify with being rich or poor or well-educated or ugly or beautiful or smart or stupid or whatever, I have a problem, right? And of course, we accumulate all these identities, even more than just outside ourselves, inside ourselves, with our house, with our car, with the status of our kids, with so much stuff. And it really blocks us. But some of the worst aspects of the ego is, again, to do with this intellect stuff. We think, I know, I am right. My religious beliefs are right. My social beliefs are right. My political beliefs are right. We don't want to listen to the other side. And that is the cause of most of humanity's problems. Why do we have to have a conference like this, a global spirituality mahotsav? Because there's conflict, there's difference. We don't come together. And, my teacher Daji used to put it in a very humorous way. He said, even terrorists help each other out. Why do we as spiritual people not help each other out? We're all human beings, and so these are the things that stop consciousness from evolving. But then through spiritual practice, this is exactly what we work on removing. And that's why consciousness can evolve.
Thank you so much. You said how, the impressions get lodged in the mind, and through spiritual processes, we can, try and remove it. And I know that you were also talking about the heartfulness traditions and the heartfulness practices. So I was wondering, if you can share some interesting and the most unique element of heartfulness is the yogic transmission, right? So if you can share how the role of Pranahuti in removing these impressions.
Wow. I don't know if I can answer that, but I'll tell you what I know from experience.
Thank you.
I think it goes way beyond what any of us really know. Before coming here, I was watching a research video by a woman in the US who went to one of our centers. She's a meditator, but she's only just discovered heartfulness. She's been meditating for many years. And she came to one of the group meditations in the US, and she used her device to measure the energy in the room. So you can see it as, if you like, the aura of a room with colors, etc. And so she did it before the meditation started, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then after the meditation finished. And when you see her images, you see the colors change. And the color that, the colors that came and built up through the meditation were gold and pink especially. And gold she associates with the center of, all existence on a frequency level. And pink with love. So you actually have a visual depiction of what happens when the transmission's flowing during a meditation. Because before that, there are all sorts of dark colors and blockages, etc., in the room itself. Not in the individual people meditating. She didn't measure that. But in the room, in the atmosphere of the room where this meditation was happening. And the gold color just went up and up and up like that. It plateaued at the highest level. And then only about half an hour after the meditation finished did it start to tail off. And it's not that transmission is something in itself that's measurable or even that you can feel necessarily, because it's qualityless. It's from the source. It doesn't have any materiality to it at all. But she could measure its effects. And we feel its effects, don't we? What happens when you meditate with transmission is that it's like you're getting a helping hand to go to the center of your being. Because the transmission's coming from the center of your being, it's pulling you also. It's resonating with that part of you. And you find that instead of being on the surface in all the clutter and all the external stuff, without much effort, when you close your eyes, you can go in deep. So it's almost like a lift going up a high-story building instead of having to walk up the stairs. It's such an incredible aid to evolution. For two reasons. Firstly, because it's giving you glimpses of where you're going. It's like a carrot, to the donkey. You get glimpses of states that are not yet your state, but you know that this is there. You still have to acclimatize, you still have to recalibrate, you still have to adjust yourself so that you can stay there. But you get glimpses, and that is phenomenal. Because so many people meditate without much experience and they really, really get frustrated. But on the other hand, also, it's resonating. It's nourishing and resonating with that part of yourself. So Babaji wrote a beautiful thing in one of his books called The 10 Maxims of Sajmarg, commentary on the 10 Maxims of Sajmarg, where he said that at the time of creation, at the beginning of the universe, there were different vibrations that emanated from the source. And one he called for us human vibrations, which are the energy levels that we carry in the body that allow us, if you like, to create impressions, to have our physiology affected, etc. And then he said there are also divine vibrations that are not touched by any of that stuff. And that's what Pranahuti is infusing into us, offering to us. So what do we do in Heartfulness? We clean out the heaviness, we infuse transmission. We clean out the heaviness, we infuse transmission. We're removing the human vibration heaviness that's accumulated. We're replacing it with divine vibrations. And as a result, we become lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter in our being. We become simpler in our being. We become purer in our being. And I think without that, the journey is so long to get to that. Because you talk to psychologists and what people go through with dealing with trauma, for example. And all of us have some level of trauma in our system. To remove, it's very difficult. But with this, it's not that we don't have to do the work. It's not just a magic wand. But it removes and it gives us the capability then to work through the process. It undoes the knots of all that heaviness in our system. So, it's phenomenal. I don't know what else to say. It's the most remarkable gift humanity has.
Thank you so much. It's an experience which we have to go through, right? To actually understand. And
I still don't understand it.
Yeah.
But I experience things that I think, my goodness, how is this possible?
Yeah. And then the effects it has on us, on our behavior, on our attitudes, on our... So that's interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just remembered where you spoke a lot about Swami Vivekananda, and I just remembered that he had told in one of his books that if you don't perceive the soul or if you don't experience God, then it's as well that we don't speak about it or something like that, something similar to that. And, you right now spoke a lot about how transmission undoes the knots, how transmission removes the impurities or the impressions, how transmission removes the impressions of the past. And we also spoke a lot about the expansion of consciousness or the evolution of consciousness. And I was just wondering about what Swami Vivekananda said about the perception of the soul. It's something which is totally invisible, intangible, and thus this transmission's effect helps in, how does it, I know it does, but so my question is not does it. So my question is, how does this transmission help us in the perception of the soul?
Okay. I think we are aware of the soul all the time without knowing it. So in deep sleep, of course, that's all that's really functioning. The body is not functioning. The mind has gone to its lowest level, just a subsistence level of, down to 0.4 hertz, etc. What is there that is really at the focus of our being when we're in deep sleep? It's only the soul. And yogis call it the shushupti state. Mm. So we're totally in touch with God, you can say, in deep sleep, which is why it's so rejuvenating, because we're just beyond all this, hoo-ha of having to live on the earth, etc. We're in that state, but we're not aware of it. Or most of us are not aware of it. When we meditate, we learn how to be in that state while awake, and eventually while aware. It's a state that's called samadhi, and the highest state of that is sahaj samadhi, or natural samadhi, where we can be sitting talking, we can be going about our work while still in that state, connected, aware of the soul's existence, because the soul is what is guiding us all the time. It's not only our life force, but when you read Vivekananda's work on this whole process and how we perceive things through the senses, right? We're outside, it's a beautiful sunny day. We go for a walk in the forest or on the beach, and we're just so enamored of the waves and the birds and, the dolphins or the squirrels in the trees or whatever. And it's beautiful, right? It's all coming through the senses. It comes through the mind, through the different functions of the mind. But it goes back to the soul, to the center, for decisions, for creativity, for inspiration, and comes out again. There's a constant flow through the body and the senses, in through the mind to the soul and back out again, all the time going on in us. We're using that faculty all the time without knowing it. We wouldn't exist for 1/1000th of a second without it. Everything that we do involves the soul all the time. If you look at an atom, the very center of an atom is space, is vacuum, is nothingness. And the whole atom depends on that for its existence. Same with us. Those three bodies all depend on the causal body for its existence, the soul. So what happens with Pranahuti, with transmission, is that because this is where our focus is, and it's an inward focus to the center. It's what's called pratyahara in yoga, where we turn away from the external and we start to really focus inwards. And then the next step in yoga is dharana, which is about flowing inwards. There's inward and outward flow always in everything in nature and within us. And this current or this flow towards the center is taking us to the soul all the time. So we become more aware. It's not that a normal person who's wandering around not aware is not using the soul all the time. They are. That's as much a part of their existence as a spiritual person. But they don't put their attention there. It's just going on. But with us, our attention's there. So awareness is there. I don't know whether it makes our soul any better than somebody who's not. I don't think so. But maybe the quality changes or something. But the thing is, we become so much more aware of that part of our existence and value it so much more. That's all I know, I mean, you get glimpses of other stuff, but it's just there. all the time.
Thank you. During this idea about the perception of the soul, I was just wondering how can our spiritual journey, we live throughout and we go through our existence. And I would like to understand how the spiritual journey can help us unfold our perception of the soul.
Boy, you ask questions. I mean, this could take hours, but let's keep to a very simple answer, yes?
Okay.
So when you have a tree, you have a seed, right? And what do you give the seed to get it to germinate? Light, water, a little bit of soil. And it germinates and it turns into a little sapling. What do you give the sapling to get it to keep growing? Light, water, soil. It turns into a young tree. And it's starting to bear fruit, etc. What do you give it to keep going on its journey? Light, water, soil. If the soil becomes depleted, you add fertilizer. But these three things, essentially. Once it becomes a big tree, same thing. Light, water, soil. The spiritual journey is very similar. What we need along the way are the same things. And so what are those things? And I love the way that Babaji in Heartfulness took all the yogic traditions and he distilled it into this simple essence. Do we need lots of rituals and stuff? No. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them, but we don't need them on a spiritual journey. What do we need? We need purity. So we need something to remove the heaviness that accumulates in our system, just as we need to take a bath or shower to remove the dirt of the day's activities. It's a similar thing, when our energy field is disturbed by interactions or the environment or whatever, we need to clean it. We need to get rid of these impurities. So purity is one aspect. So we have a practice in Heartfulness called cleaning, which does exactly that. We need to be able to connect and dive deeper into ourselves, to go through the layers of our existence, which correlate with the chakras in the human system, so that we can start to expand our consciousness and evolve our consciousness into its full potential. Because most of the time we're nowhere near that potential. We're not using what we've been given. And meditation with transmission allows us to do that, to keep expanding, to keep evolving to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. And it's endless, it's limitless. It's not that we reach something and it's stopped and we can go, we've reached the top of the mountain. It's not like that. This is an endless, infinite journey. But it is definable and it is describable, which you can see in Daji's books if you look at them. And then we also need a practice that is constantly connecting us with our center and removing the blockages mentally to that. And that we do through a process of prayer. Prayer is the great communicator, the great conversation, the great connector. And in this case, we're connecting with the highest aspect of ourself through a living master to the divine, to the source. And that process is just the most beautiful, for me, it's my favorite of all the practices. It's just something so potent and so incredible that human beings can use and we don't use enough. So you think you have these three different things. You have a cleaning practice, you have a meditation practice, you have a prayer practice. Each day you do each one once. You start in the morning with meditation. In the evening you do cleaning. Before sleeping you pray. Each day you're recalibrating your system. And when you do this day after day after day after day, your system attunes to that. And it stays in those states for longer. It stays prayerful longer. It stays meditative longer. It stays pure and simple longer. Till eventually that becomes the whole 24 hours. And all you're doing through the practices is you're just tweaking or adjusting so you're back there. And then the journey's just effortless. So at every point you're doing the same things. Meditation, cleaning, prayer. Whether you're at the beginning of the journey or the end of the journey. Just like the plant has water, light and soil, the beginning and the end of the journey. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. It was a very simple yet very poignant way of putting it, and I don't have a question after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Purnima. It's always a pleasure.
Same here. It's a joy and pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of GhanaCast. Do subscribe to GhanaCast on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. Until the next episode, from the entire GhanaCast team, namaste and goodbye.